Next session is Fireside Chat. It was extensively discussed by American games in the 30s. And we wanted to address the people and let them know about the Great Depression and then about the Second World War. And so that they have a close, intimate talk with the people. And this was a series of talks like that. So there was I did not want a very formal kind of validity session where it would be taxing because it's the last session. This is a very important talk and I request Sanjay Babu to answer this.
Thanks, Cesses and but apologies for a long day. And I have no option but we can come for some more time. My entire professional life, I've never played the role for anchor. Your program says I have to be an anchor.
Moderator.
I can't moderate with these two gentlemen. But I was thinking when I saw the program, this is called a Fireside Chat. And if my father had been here, he would have said, how can you have a fireside conversation without a drink in your hand? Normally, firesides are nice, evening conversations. But let me try and see if I can get some interest going without a drink in your hand. So let me start with a couple of basic questions. Narasimha Rao, Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, the chairman of the Finance Commissions, then in the 10th Finance Commission, were either distinguished jurists or eminent politicians. It was with Gujarat that we started professionally. Khusro, Kelkar, Dr. Rajan, Reddy, NK, and so my first question to both of you is the Finance Commission a political institution or purely a fiscal organization that requires fiscal expertise? Because this is the first Finance Commission. I mean, if you think of NK Singh as a semi-politician, this is the first Finance Commission that has no political group, so purely technical body. Is that the way to go?
Okay, well, that's a tough question. Mind you, it doesn't matter who I chairman is, right? You want economic expertise. I view, on balance, there would be merit in having a heavyweight politician who doesn't have any further ambitions in politics, but can naturally look at the entire political economy and say, well, I know what your problems are, I've been there myself, and I have enough expertise. And you can have more than one economist. They're quite cheap, so it shouldn't hold you back. So short answer is, I think it helps to have an economically savvy politician. But if you have an economist, that's okay too. The truth of the matter is, I really don't think the Finance Commission is nearly as important in determining the fiscal health and future of our revenues. I mean, there are many more things, a lot of which have been discussed. Hopefully, we'll get back. But the idea that you've got a perfect federal structure, it's working very well, all the difficult issues have been resolved, there's just a little bit of revenue sharing that has to be sorted out. That just isn't the case. The problem we've got are really fundamental, and I'm not even sure that the Finance Commission can trigger a serious evaluation of how to address this problem. That has to be triggered somewhere outside the system, somewhere in the meeting.
An ideal chairman of the Finance Commission would be a politician who's got fiscal expertise or a fiscal economist who's got a political background. But we have very few such people. You mentioned some names, perhaps the fit the bill. But having been an IAS officer myself, I'm not to be a bit defensive. The organizing principle of the IAS really is that a journalist with a breadth of knowledge at the very top of the policy pyramid with expertise domain expertise coming from specialists actually is an ideal thing. And by and large, I think that that model worked to the country. The same goes even for the finance commission. If you have somebody with a broad expertise who's got knowledge of the country, especially knowledge of the front lines, I think, and if the commission has within it experts who have expertise over fiscal matters, that will be a good commission as well.
Okay, so let me move on to some substantial issues. So you spoke about the remarkable resilience of the federal system. One way that in the early years we were concerned over centrifugal forces, partition, post-partition, and then things have since worked out. And yet, listening to the conversation today, really taken back to the 80s and the 90s, when there used to be a vibrant debate, discussion about centrist relations, which today I hear only someone like the former finance minister of Tamil Nadu, PTR, article, vociferous. I do not see too many political leaders, maybe Mamata Banerjee. So we have between Stalin and Mamata Banerjee, only two chief ministers who speak for the state. Is this because there is in fact no centrifugal forces operating and there is greater stability in the polity? Or is it because of what I think Hasib said, that we are now in the era of coercive mechanisms?
Yeah, if you look at the political spectrum today, the NDA occupies much of the political space in the country. There is very little non-NDA space. So only those politicians, those chief ministers who are in the non-NDA space can speak for those states. It's not as if other states have no grievances, but I don't believe they're expressing the grievances. Will you allow me to tell a story? Sure. Just 2 minutes.
This is Fireside.
Yeah. There are some state politicians who take a broader view. Like I'm very fond of telling the story about Gurubhasan. When Gujarat first became Prime Minister, I think in the mid-90s, the Prime Minister, Devagowda became Prime Minister with the support of Chief Ministers. So soon after the installed as Prime Minister, states to Chief Minister said, give us more money. He had no more money to give, so he did what seasoned politicians would do, which is appoint a commission. And the job was entrusted to the Interstate Council under the then Home Minister in Gupta, and with about 8 chief ministers. And the remit of the committee was to see how the states can get more. So once the committee started working, chief ministers went all over the place, went all over the map, saying that center by the center need money, they would be how it was, center is wasteful money, etc. And this process went on for the committee, went on for about 8-9 months. As any government institution went from committee, subcommittee, subcommittee, etc. And I recall the last meeting of the committee in Young on Saturday afternoon. There was Sixteenth Finance there was the chairman of the Planning Commission. There was the finance minister and 8 chief ministers, 200 staff members to discuss the final report. And the chief minister started with 5% money, give us more, give us more, give us 80%, give us then slowly came down, went on for about 2-3 hours. And everybody is getting fatigued that they're getting more helpful. And then, Anthony Gupta, really passionately saying that, look, we all want the movement. The central government needs money. Finance minister saying that they also need money for defense, etc. So be more reasonable. So over the next 15 minutes, some consensus that the center must give at least 50% of their total revenue to the states, either to Planning Commission or to Finance Commission or to Water Commission. Every chief minister fell in line. except one person. And that was our chief minister, Chandrababu. So here were 8 chief ministers. One was the secretary, was financially PAP at that time. So we were there. And there were 200 people in the hospital table. And when every chief minister fell in line, and only Chandrababu Naidu would not know what to say. There was a big drop silence in the room. He doesn't describe he's sort of looking for tea. Okay. And then he looked at me and asked me, especially what you saying, everybody's agree, why didn't you fall in line? He listened to me, then he looked at the seat, looked at the floor, looked at it. Then, we were seated up on the washroom table. Andhra Pradesh was alphabetically first. West Bengal is alphabetically last, people, 8 chief ministers. Jyoti Basu, Chief Minister of West Bengal, got up, walked around the table. It took him about 2 minutes to travel from West Bengal to Andhra Pradesh. Taking over several tours. And told Chandrababu Naidu, why did we all the set up is, we need money, but the center also needs money. Why don't we? So the long answer to your question is, we also need state chief ministers who take our order.
Well, before I go to Montague, let me narrate another story. It's very reminding. The Garfield formula. There was a National Development Council meeting at which the chief ministers were loggerheads. They were unable to arrive at a common agreement. Mrs. Indira Gandhi gave up 69. And she said, look, this meeting can't go on and on. And she told Mr. B.R. Gandhi, who was the chairman of the planning commission, that you form a small group and sort it out. So Gadkil called Ramanand Reddy, Mohanlal Sukhadiya, and EMS Committee Party. The 3 chief ministers sat with Gadkil and devised the formula. So actually the Gadkil formula is the Ramanand Reddy, Mohanlal Sukhadiya, EMS Committee Party. So these things do happen. What really?
That's a lovely story. It tells you the strategic role of fatigue. One thing I can think about, given the technical nature of any sort of tax and resource distribution, I'm really surprised that none of the chief ministers have actually offered to, either use the GST Council or maybe even the National Development Council, whichever occasionally meets, to say, well, look, we have an issue and we want this issue discussed and prepare a paper which would be prepared by technical people. People would be forced to react to this. Even in the GST Council, one of the things that is, it kind of goes into a meeting and it comes up. We don't have knowledgeable papers being written. For example, the sort of example I gave, that we know that between now and 10 years from now, we want the tax GDP ratio to go up by whatever it is, 2, 3, or 4 percentage points. So just conceptually, in order to achieve that, even if we have a GST, how do we intend to do it? Are we going to raise the 5% rate to 10%? Or are we going to move quite a few of the zero tax commodities into the tax rate and have an 8% rate? Somebody puts forward, if nothing else, an option 1, option 2, option 3 can work. One thing should be quite clear: if nothing is done, you certainly won't get these tax increases, and you won't be able to do all this Viksit Bharat stuff that you're talking about. So I think there's virtually a collapse. On the central side, we don't have a planning commission, so there's no institution ostensibly independent. I agree that we were all creatures of the central government, so state government was state what you had to do. You're just appointees. We'd have to accept that. We would say we are appointees, but we are very conscientious also. But today, when chief ministers clearly have views, I really don't see why they don't articulate them.
Well, you mentioned the National Development Council. It hasn't met for the last 11 years. This Prime Minister has not convened a single meeting of the NDC.
Has any chief minister written to him asking him to convene?
That I don't know. But the fact is, that the NDC now defunct. That brings me to my next question, which is you spoke about the need to institutionalize cooperative federalism. Now, the NDC was the institution for cooperative federalism. It used to meet regularly till at least 2014. In fact, Manmohan Singh took almost going beyond the NDC. He used to travel to state capitals. You would have been with him in many of those, maybe all of them. Where he would sit in a room like this with the entire state cabinet. I remember coming here with him in Jubilee Hall when Rashid was chief minister. The entire cabinet was there, he was there, and state problems were discussed. None of that happens now. So when we talk about institutionalizing cooperative federalism, would it be enough if we just have an NDC meeting every again? This could be an interesting recommendation for this conference today, saying that the NDC has not met it should be. Or are there other ways for institutionalizing cooperative federalism?
Yeah, you have a very fond recall of NDC, but if you throw back your mind, you will realize that even the NDC was non-functional. It was drawn along political lines, chief ministers gave speeches, nobody listened to anyone else, and it was more for the media than for moving forward in policy. So what I think should happen is, remember when P. Narasimha was Prime Minister, he once said he didn't get much currency, but he once said that for 1 year, let us take leave of politics or whatever, something like that. He said, okay, let's all concentrate on the national agenda, forget about politics. So there should be some forum where chief ministers and the prime minister meet, away from the media glare, where they have a business like me to discuss some issues of national importance, limited agenda. They're not speaking to the media, they're not speaking for the media, they're speaking for the country. And then maybe afterwards have an open meeting where they discuss that. But what we need for cooperative federalism is not a replication of the NDC model, but a model where chief ministers and the prime minister and the central cabinet have a business-like meeting on a limited agenda with the specific objective of moving policy forward.
Okay. No, I strongly agree with that. The only question is, since there is already some kind of governing council of the NITI Aayog, which is meant to be the replacement of the NDC, that exists. A simple thing would do for some chief ministers to say that we last met under your chairmanship, whatever it is, 10 years ago, and I found the meeting very useful, with a little bit of exaggeration. We do want another meeting, and by the way, I sat with my cabinet and I prepared a note that I would like to discuss in this governing council, and I'm sending it to you here. Maybe you can ask other chief ministers to do the same. Something like that, you know.
Well, that brings me to the other issue of center-state relations today as compared to, let's say, 10 years back. It's very interesting that it was in the mid-60s that Anna Rai set up the Rajamandar Committee on center-state relations. At a time when center-state relations came under tremendous stress. Then again, it was in the early 80s when Indira Gandhi set up the Sarkari Commission, mainly in response to the kind of sentiment that was generated about federalism by two important chief ministers of that time, N.T. Ramarao and Jyoti Basu, who worked together to create a national kind of campaign on center-state relations. I remember I used to be teaching in the University of Hyderabad and attending a seminar in Calcutta, convened by Jyoti Basu and Andhra Pradesh was well represented there. So, mid-60s, you have the Rajamandar responding to attention in center-state relations. Early 80s, you have the Sarkari Commission. Difference, of course, was Rajamandar Commission was set up by Tamil Nadu, while Sarkari Commission was set up by Indira Gandhi. Now, once again, the Tamil Nadu government has set up the Korean with similar terms of reference. So the question is, is there a need for a much more asserted the viable debate on centrist regulations going beyond financial commission. Well, both the Sarkar Commission as well as look at many other issues.
No, I strongly feel it must go beyond the finance commission. We discussed some of the issues that was mentioned, put it on the table. Number one is the issue of very large scales. By the way, everybody now recognizes that if we want to achieve what the Prime Minister himself wants, which is a huge inflow of foreign direct investment, it's going to be intimately connected with the quality of cities that we can reach. And frankly, in India, the only way you're going to get good quality city, if you break up some of the large states and each of the new ones has to get that. Because the land issues and all are such that it's only if a new state is being created, that the collective energies of that state, that you must have a decent capital, enable you to go to the state government, enable them to do the land acquisition, etc. So one is this size issue that has to be sorted out. The other is quite frankly, it's an issue that has come up in some of the discussions today, that in some of these free trade agreements, they're opening up of agriculture. Given that agriculture and farmers in every country are highly specially sensitive, it's very easy to whip up sort of sense of fear. But you do need a discussion on some of the issues of agriculture that are otherwise regarded as highly controversial, and which I think we need to be clear whether the controversy is justified. For example, do we envisage that we will be able to achieve what we want to achieve with the present system of incredibly non-transparent systems or a conversion of land use from agriculture to non-agriculture? I don't understand why that is supposed to be against the interests of farmers. If I'm a farmer and I'm close to that, if the state government were to say to me that, look, I give you now permission to convert this stuff to non-agricultural use, how can I object? But yet it is argued always as if something against the interest of farmers. Not very clear to me. It's also not very clear to me that opening up to trade is of no interest in Indian agriculture, because Indian exports of agriculture are much more than imports of agriculture. So the notion that Indian agriculture cannot export is just on the face of it totally flawed. So this needs to be brought out by some states so that people can judge that, look, is it, if you're thinking of a modern trade system, is it really against the interest of farmers? I believe, for example, in the UK FDA, I don't know this, I haven't read the thing, somebody told me, that in the end they finally decided not to allow whatever cheddar cheese and Stilton cheese to come in. The vast majority of our population doesn't like Stilton egg, but good cheese is also very good. And we are hugely underestimating the capacity of our farmers. Once they notice that there is demand, they'll produce the damn thing much cheaper than the stuff that is imported. You can see that already, because with the kind of foodie enthusiasm around the country, the number of artisanal cheeses that are being produced in the Himalayas and nearby and so on is not. So I think that's just one set of examples. I think the other area that I feel we need to worry about is power. This was talked about in the last session. There was some objection to privatization. I should say, by the way, I'm gung-ho about privatization and distribution. As a Delhi resident, I can tell you that when we had the government running the Delhi distribution system compared to the present arrangement, the present arrangement is Viksit. Delhi is not Viksit in many other areas, but in power supply, we are Viksit. So I have not the slightest doubt that if you do this, now the Finance Commission has quite a good treatment, and they're very honest. I have to hand it to my good friend Raghav Banerjee, because while he's categorically saying we must privatize, he's also saying that Gujarat and Haryana seem to have done very well without privatization. So under certain circumstances, it can happen. But I was told that, for example, UP had decided to privatize 3 of the distribution areas as separate discoms. But the latest I hear is that's kind of being postponed. I mean, that's very regrettable. So there are lots of such things. And frankly, unless the states produce discussion papers, and it can't be a discussion paper that says this is our policy. They should commission their own, whatever commissions or something, to put forward proposals. Each of these proposals will require support from the central government, and this can only be discussed if you call such a meeting and discuss state-based papers, not just something coming from the central government.
No, so on the issue of interstate relations, contract advocated breaking up large states. Now, there is certainly a case of breaking up a relation, or more than one is.
And they are.
But having said that, I think Hasid's point about the political character of states as they came into being. I mean, Tamil Nadu represents something, Bengal represents something, Andhra Pradesh represented something. In other words, they have a character of their own, which we have systematically diluted with the breakup of states. And that has always interstate relations. I mean, someone spoke about the chief minister of Andhra Pradesh, you mentioned having the power to keep silent for a few minutes. Like, that's why you talk about central. Today, the chief ministers whose voice won't make a difference. So, I mean, where are you on this whole issue of large states versus small states?
I really haven't thought about it. I'm thinking on my feet as it were. But I think the cost benefit calculus of breaking up states is negative. Because the administrative cost of running another state is very high. And are you getting commensurate benefits? I don't know, maybe Jay Prakash knows, are there any studies which have been done, I'm sure there are, about whether when a state is broken up, whether the two constituent states together have done better than the integrated state would have done. I don't know if there are any studies like that. Madhya Pradesh has been broken up or UP has been broken up. If you look at those studies, we will know. But I don't believe that mainly breaking up which states which have some cultural language identity into small states is undoubtedly positive cost benefit. I don't believe.
On the issue of fiscal responsibility of states, I mean, do you think states have today become also impediments to structural reform?
I think that the impediment to structural reforms is too negative and I believe not an accurate representation. But I think states' inputs are not being taken into account in taking forward reform. As I mentioned in my remarks earlier in the morning, the first generation reform that Monty piloted under Prime Minister Narasimha Rao and Finance Minister Manmohan Singh, they could be done by Delhi, they could be done by North consulting states because they were all in the domain of the center. You put the liberalization, dismantling the license community, opening up the financial sector. But the second generation reforms that we now have to implement need not just the consent, but even the cooperation. We saw that, when we had that big debate about multi-brand retail, states resisted. We had a problem with implementing labor laws because some states resisted. We had problems with implementing farm law reforms because states resisted. And I think the central government is not taking sufficient initiative to develop a consensus before actually implementing reforms. I think the onus is on the central government. I recognize that all states are not united in their interest. Even in the farm lobby, there were some states which actually would have benefited from farm law reforms. So I think the central government can be more consultative. Even states which were losing would have acquisted them and give and take, but that's not happening. So I think it's a problem of managing our center-state relations better, and the initiative has to be taken by the central government.
But this is an important point, for example, in farm law reforms. Haryana at that time was the BJP government, the North was SAD government. Now, frankly, if the BJP had persuaded the Haryana governments to persuade their governments that these laws would be good for them, and Haryana went ahead and did them, sheer competitive federalism would have persuaded the governments to switch strategies. So I think, I mean, and elsewhere, like some states have done more, not as much, I think, as necessary. Even on labor reforms, for example, if you look at the Foxconn, I mean, Tamil Nadu has done a fantastic job by attracting this huge facility, right? I'm very interested to know how many of these women who are employed in Foxconn are contractual rather than regular. Because under the law, if they're regular, then more than 300, they need the permission of state or central government in order to live off. But with the law is that you can have contractual labor. So if they're having contractual labor and hiring 40,000 people on that basis, doesn't it make sense to say, look, let them be regular, but it necessarily can hire them more easily? I think we're just, this debate isn't taking place between the state government and the central government. And it should.
Yeah, it's got to be long adversarial.
Yeah, of course.
Absolutely. Every debate like this becomes adversarial in political.
Yeah, I mean, look, take ease of doing business. Okay? Manish Sabharwal, who's a pretty knowledgeable kind of guy, he did this thing for Niti Aayog, and he found that there were 20,000 compliances, half of which involved criminal action, etc., and half of them were the center and half of them were the states. Now, today, I mean, if there was a chief minister who wanted to hit the headlines, saying that, look, X is the first state to have reduced unnecessary compliances by 70%. He will do it. He doesn't need any central government approval. Why has no one done that? I don't know whether any of the civil services in these states have persuaded their chief minister that why don't we, if you like, steal a march on the central government, then we can get this done. It would be a terrific thing to announce in Davos. So we are the leading state because we've done this.
No, Chandrababu Naidu announced in Davos.
He hasn't done
He
it.
actually did something like that. Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
That's
So we are running out of time, so I have two more questions and then we'll wind up. My next question actually follows from what you just said. We're talking about competitive federalism, cooperative federalism. Do we actually see in the realm of reform, policy change is a big business or whatever? Cooperative federalism in the sense one state is learning from another. But in the field of offering freebies, as they call it, competitive federalism, in other words, the race to the bottom, each state, in fact, imitating the bad practices of other states. Do you see this happening or am I exaggerating?
No, that is a danger, and around the world, given the rise of populism, people worry about this. And frankly, the only thing that can hold us back is either a much more high quality political process, where somebody announces something which is going to take the state down there. His opponents can point out that, look, this is what we're going to do. Now, we're very far from that. As a matter of fact, we can see in many countries around the world, people are very far from that. So there is a danger, because populism, I mean, the costs are all postponed into the future, the benefits are today. And short-termism means that these guys are always going.
I don't think that's an issue of competitive federalism. I think it's an issue of competitive politics. Within the state, if one party offers something, another party cannot say that we will discipline, we'll be responsible, they have to offer. And that's becoming competitive populism. And that gets copied in other states, and across the country we're having that. No, it strikes me, I was talking with Deepika, maybe you called him 3 years ago. The Prime Minister actually decried the rape culture. He said that I don't understand what rape is, but I'm something like that. So he decried the rape culture. Within 2 weeks of that, there was a UP election, and the BJP actually announced a whole lot of freebies, and the Prime Minister went to the rooftops campaigning on those freebies. So I don't think any political party will take the initiative to form a consensus. I don't think any state will come forward and say across the country we must all agree. The initiative has to be taken by the central government in a political manner, just as we have all come together to, on FRBM, for example. We all come together on ASP. I think the central government must take the initiative on getting all the states together on agreeing on a code of conduct on fees. Otherwise, we will not move forward. Pardon me for using the word free, we have just used to have transfer payments or whatever we call.
Well, that brings me to my last question, because I'm a strict person, as Dr. Revati knows, and I think exactly also, which is a political economy question. We have been speaking about fiscal responsibility or fiscal responsibility. I wrote a book 5 years back called India's Power Week, in which I put forward the argument that fiscal irresponsibility is a manifestation of political incompetence or political bankruptcy. In other words, because the political leaderships have become, in many ways, delegitimized because of bad governance, they are forced to buy voters through previous over stock brand. So you have Nitish Kumar in Bihar who runs a completely useless government, but offers 10,000 rupees to you and gets re-elected. So actually, fiscal responsibility is the other side of the coin of complete bureaucratic political incompetence in governance. How do you get it?
No, I mean, I have to agree that, the way it's going, unless there's a political, either higher level of responsibility or competence, there's nothing to stop it. But it's not just India. You're doing this everywhere. So we really need to think more broadly. I was like, why is this happening? And there's no one having any way of stopping it. But in the end, a much more informed discussion and a much more informed election. Because in my view, it's the future of young that being sacrificed. Let me give you a very simple example. The idea of guys nearing retirement wanting to change the pension system. I think the simple way of preventing that sort of pressure from developing is that the pay commission should be instructed to keep in mind the pension liability before it makes the pay commission a point. I mean, if you run these two things as separate, pay commission charges ahead and makes a large number of them, then you lobby on the pension. It will be a unified reward. And if you have a unified reward, pay commission will clearly say, like, look, any relaxation on this front means you get less pay. And let the politicians then decide whether all young people who are trying to get jobs are more important than the guys who just retired.
I think I'm not sure what your question was, but if you are saying that fiscal responsibility can be enforced by the bureaucracy.
No, my question is fiscal irresponsibility the other side of the coin of political incompetence, political mismanagement, that you run bad government and therefore to get re-elected to give these things?
Absolutely. Because any chief minister who says that I'm going to give you 10,000 rupees per month or whatever, is actually saying what? I'm sorry, I can't do anything better for you. I can't do anything to improve your long-term livelihood. So please take this and be done with it. That is actually the implied message. So it is in some sense political incompetent people who take it as political benevolence. But if you think about it like political economist that you are, it's actually an incompetence saying that I'm sorry, I can't do anything more, please take this and be done with it. And I think that's the way we should. That's the picture we must paint of politicians who offer this transfer payments.
Absolutely. That is because that is my view, which is that we, particularly economists, focus on purely fiscal issues without realizing that at the end of the day, fiscal policy is politics. And then the politics is wrong. Fiscal policy will be wrong. There is no way you can get the right fiscal policy with the wrong politics. With that, I end. Thank you. Thank you.
The point that you pick the smallest states, whether there's any studies saying that after the division of the state, larger state, smaller state, yes, there are some studies. Look at Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh and Bihar and Jharkhand. There are studies showing that state division has blocked high rate of growth. And I also want to remind that what Infect has said in the Global Rising Summit that Telangana has clocked high rate of growth. And this is because of, I think this is because of the separate state. And also, another point I want to make is that the per capita revenue of Telangana was always higher than. So apart from that, I love the thanks. So I had the idea of this having a panel discussion on Sixteenth Finance Commission was moved by Dr. Marcus and I thank him for walking the talk, for being with us. At that time, he was not there with us, but he was ready for the trouble to be with us the whole day here. And I thank you, sir. Thank you very much for that. And the other idea was to also bring in South Indian finance ministers, finance secretaries, so that could have a informed discussion. But as they were all preoccupied in the budget discussions, we could not, despite our continuous reminders, they have not responded much. So we did not have much of that kind of discussion. And I immensely thank Dr. Subbarao, who has really developed all this idea. Dr. J.R. and myself, when we discussed and put it in a form, then he encouraged us, and then we had so many online discussions, offline discussions, and the whole of the designing of this and informing and contacting experts from different institutions and different fields. The suggestions have come from him, and we thank Dr. J.R. and myself thank immensely Dr. Subbarao for mentoring us and then handholding us for realizing this particular event. I thank all the panelists who have, of course, we are contacted like many. The response rate was because of other reasons and all, because they were engaged in different programs and all. Again and again, we reviewed it and extended the invitation to others. So I thank all the panelists who have agreed to be here, and for this one day, I thank them a lot. And Dr. J.R.'s support is invaluable. We have prepared the brief note, and which was circulated to all the panelists, and with raising some guide points for discussion, which was again, the inputs were given by Dr. Subbarao. And also we prepared the this was to the Cesses has Cesses is wanting to also develop a center or unit on state finances, because we are at the present we do not have, it's not a developed kind of thing, but I think this initiative will certainly lead to develop this unit and then motivate the scholars to pick up research issues that have been discussed from the morning. There are many research issues that have been thrown up by the panelists since morning, and that will materialize into research studies by scholars from CES. Yeah, I thank all the participants who have participated, chosen from different universities and institutions, especially from the domain of economics and science, so that there will be some informed discussion. I thank my office who have tirelessly worked towards realizing this We also put the name of the conference proceedings, and then maybe we'll get back if there's really any clarifications from this. Thank you, one and all. I thank the press for attending this, and I thank the rapporteurs who are here, our scholars who are here, and for recorded the proceedings. Thank you.